Okay, thank you so much. I would love to share. Oh, here it is. I found it. Sorry. Okay. So here we go. Um, uh, Thank you for that wonderful talk. That was so interesting. Um, I learned a lot from it. I'll start with a little background. So this is actually my fourth presentation at the Humor Research Conference. The first three were done in person. And this time I'm doing it from my home in Fukuoka, Japan. I'm a linguist here. Good morning. It's Sunday morning. And uh, so here we go. So I moved away from humor for a few years and I have been researching idiomatic creativity. And I want to give you kind of a little bit of background and talk about how I moved into humor once again, this time on the back of this topic. So here we go. I'd like to start with a couple jokes, which is seems like a good way to start a presentation on humor. I used to do drugs. I still do, but I used to too. And that's Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright joke. The problem with the gene pool is that there is no lifeguard. So we will return to both of these jokes later. Um, for now, let's hit the kind of boring theoretical linguistic background. So I've spent the past several years studying idiomatic creativity in English, Japanese, and Korean. And I take a deductive, data-driven, corpus-based approach. And I've mostly worked with one colleague, and she and I have elaborated a formal taxonomy of creative uses of idioms. In other words, the range of ways that speakers can alter the form of an idiom. So here are some examples based on don't count your chickens before they hatch. You can have contraction, where you delete part of the idiom. You can have extension, where you add some words, a phrase, or more. You can have syntactic alteration, where you change the syntax of the idiom. You can have lexical substitution, where you replace one of the words or more than one of the words in the idiom with something different. And I've underlined this example because we will return to it very soon. So I will just read it. Don't count your commodities investments before they hatch. And in this case, investments is a substituted lexeme. Commodities is actually an extension. Um, a lot of times these creative types come together. So you get two or three in one actual use. Finally, we have idiom blending. I won't go into that. Um, but let's talk about the functions of idiomatic creativity since we finished talking about the forms. Basically, much of the time, I'm reading the bold section in the middle, much of the time speakers get creative with idioms to help specify reference. Why do they need to do this? Because reference with idioms is extremely complicated. I'm going to show you on the next slide the reference, the referentiality invoked by this corpus use we found, which is the full example is Australia, therefore, should not be counting its commodities investments before they hatch. So from our paper, we analyzed the referentiality. The left half of this diagram, you can see the entrenched meaning, which is basically in the dictionary. You can see there's a literal meaning. There's an idiomatic or figurative meaning associated with it. Don't rely on your good results before they're realized. And this idiomatic or figurative meaning is also the generic meaning that has to be connected to a specific meaning within a discourse context. And that's why this is so complicated. There's so many roles in the idiom frame, especially with a large proverbial idiom like don't count your chickens before they hatch. So people get really creative. It's usually to say, hey, this is the reference of this role of the idiom. So finally, my colleague and I have achieved a certain level of understanding of idiomatic creativity. So I could ask, how do speakers use idiomatic expressions creatively for the purpose of creating humor? And my kind of guess, well, since reference is so key, they probably intentionally make it ambiguous, something like that. That was my initial hypothesis. So I wanted to get some data. And I started to look at English stand-up comedy because I wanted to know that every expression was intended to be humorous and not have to worry about that issue. And I watched different YouTube videos, and I kept idiomatic creativity in mind the whole time. And this is kind of the casual first stage of data collection. And I didn't find too much idiomatic creativity, to be honest. With many good comedians, I would be laughing at the jokes, but there's no idiom. There's nothing creative about the use of idioms in the material, except for two, Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright. So I decided, well, let me change my question. Let me ask how Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright use idiomatic expressions creatively for the purpose of creating humor. I know that these results will not be generalizable. They might reveal strategies that non-comedians or less creative speakers don't employ, but they could provide insight into the techniques of these two comedians or into the range of idiomatic creativity. So I thought it's still a worthwhile question to ask. Here's my boring outline. It's as boring as I could make it. I tried to be very generic. I'm going to continue a little bit with the background introduction, just one more slide, so we all know what idioms are, and then I'll hit the methods and results and discussion. That's the main part of the talk. So continuing, what is an idiom? Here's a definition. I like this one. I don't mind it. A conventional, non-compositional, multi-word expression. So conventional means that it's agreed upon in a language community. Non-compositional means that you can't just add up the meanings of each word and get the meaning of the idiom. It's not compositional in that way. So the key for you to understand about this kind of definition is that this is a broad range of phenomena that we're highlighting or grouping with the category idioms. Everything from tiny things like get up or throw away or stand out, all the way to big whole sentences like don't count your chickens before they hatch. So there's a range of idioms. I got into the definition of idioms in construction grammar. I'm going to skip that and go to methods. This is the juicy part is the results. So I really want to hurry up and get there. So I decided on Hedberg and Wright. I tried to collect as many jokes as I possibly could by the two of them. I collected almost 500 jokes by the two of them. And then this is a little tricky, but I judged 79 of the jokes to contain idioms used in the service of humor. That was my criteria. Was there an idiom used in the service of humor? This doesn't mean it was used creatively. It usually did mean that, but it didn't always mean that. I just wanted to know how many of these jokes used idioms to make the humor. And I used that criterion because then I could ask two additional questions. How and with what proportion do the comedians employ idioms canonically versus creatively in humor creation? So that's what I was wondering. Are you using the idiom in the normal canonical way, or are you doing something creative or special with it? I analyzed the form and the function. I analyzed the jokes, and here are my results. So overview, basically both comedians primarily used what I call de-idiomatization. I think it's a good term. Maybe someone else already used it. It basically means un-idiomifying, that's a bad term, the idiom. So you don't use the special semantics that the idiom carries with it. You take away the figurative semantics. So instead, they usually used a literal meaning of one of the words in the idiom or some other sense of the word that's frequently employed, but doesn't belong there in the idiom. And de-idiomatization is a kind of functional creativity. And a few idioms showed formal creativity, a few were used canonically, but basically de-idiomatization was the main pattern, the main strategy. I'll show you some examples from both comedians. We can start with Wright's joke. The problem with the gene pool is that there is no lifeguard. And this uses a literal concrete meaning of pool as swimming pool rather than the metaphorical meaning in gene pool, the collective genetic material within a population. This is killing a metaphor. So de-idiomatization through de-metaphorization. This is the kind of thing I saw. This is like 90% of all the jokes or something. We're basically like this. I'll show you a few more examples. I'll talk a little more about the jokes. So this joke implies a lack of oversight over the pool of genetic material, and that the process of reproduction and inheritance lacks regulation or quality control. This is pretty absurd. Imagining genetics needing a lifeguard is one source of the humor. Another, it could be seen as a critique of human imperfection or of the consequences of unregulated reproduction in society. I'm not sure. This gets a little cringe when we push it to the boundaries, so I won't push it anymore. Another possible source of the humor is about a contrast in expectations, the supervision in a swimming pool versus the chaotic, random, and flawed nature of genetic variation and human behavior. At least my behavior I put in as at the end there, which it may be just me, but I suspect it's more of us. Okay, another joke. Everyone has a photographic memory. Some just don't have film. And I think you can see quickly, this is the same thing. This is a literal meaning of photographic, in the end, used to create the humor. It's de-metaphorization. Photographic memory, that's the idiom. I put it in bold so you can clearly see. You take away the metaphor, kill the metaphor, you get your joke. Of course, initially, when he says photographic memory, we think of the idiom. That's the ambiguity that he intends to achieve, right? So we're going off on this path. And then he reveals, oh, I didn't mean photographic in that sense. I actually meant it literally. And that's part of the surprise and frame adjustment that we, with the punchline. So by employing a literal use of photographic, he apparently reasons that memory, like photography, requires not only equipment like a camera to capture information, but also the means to process and store information, like film for an analog camera. And doing so, he humorously critiques the idea of human forgetfulness or variability in cognitive abilities. Okay, last de-idiomatization joke by Stephen Wright. You can't have everything. Where would you put it? And here, I think it's a metonymy that he's canceling or undoing. And the metonymy would be everything for everything you might want in the canonical semantics of the idiom. But it could be a metaphor too. Everything that you could want is like everything to you. I don't know how to judge the difference. I don't know how to judge which analysis is better. This is a weakness of metaphor theory in my mind. However, in either case, it counts as an example of de-idiomatization through defigurativization. So you take away the figurative, idiomatic semantics and use something much more literal. So figurative meanings include metaphor, metonymy, exaggeration, understatement, irony, etc. So you basically kill that special meaning that you get from the idiom. And the canonical idiom treats the absurdity of fulfilling every desire. The humor lies in the absurdity, I'm sorry, the impossibility, I read that wrong. The humor lies in the absurdity of taking a philosophical idea, life's inherent trade-offs, and or the limits of human greed, and twisting it into a mundane problem of storage space. Okay, you can see this is ridiculous. The surprise reframing invites the listener to imagine the ridiculous logistics of owning literally everything. It pokes fun at human tendencies for excess and accumulation, pointing out the impracticality of limitless greed or ambition.
And you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to go quickly Hedberg joke, snake eyes, it's a gambling term or it's an animal term too. We get de-idiomatization. He uses it metaphorically or idiomatically the first time and then literally the second time. So changes of frame, great. 4 easy payments of 1995 and Hedberg's joke, he says, I would like to have a product that was available for 3 easy payments and 1 complicated payment. And again, the idiom is like 3 easy payments of 1995. And easy has a special meaning in the idiom of easy financially. And Mitch Hedberg undoes this meaning, and that's how the absurdity arises. Okay, let's go to some other jokes. What's left over? Just 5 of the 41 idiom-based jokes by Wright and 3 of the 38 by Hedberg did not employ de-idiomatization. So what about these 8 jokes? There are 2 types. There's those that use the idiom canonically, but question its applicability. And B, those that use idiosyncratic idiom semantics, that's my tongue twister, to achieve ambiguity. I'm going to go through these 2 types now. So 5 of the jokes question the applicability or rationality of the idiom. Let me give you an example. The early bird may get the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. So a genius to me. So the early bird may get the worm. This is a canonical use of the idiom. The meaning is canonical. They added the word may, but anyway, this is the basic idiom, but this alternative analysis or scenario shows, hey, this idiom doesn't always apply. Basically, the first mouse falls victim to the trap and the second mouse gets the cheese. And his point is the best strategy depends on context. And he's right. And maybe that's why it's so funny. He's so right. So he questions the applicability of the idiom. Here's some more in this category. Hard work pays off in the future. Laziness pays off now. Wow, he's right. Then there's some that I could call questioning the rationality or validity of an idiom. A clear conscience is usually the sign of a bad memory. And Hedberg's joke, I'm sick of soup of the day. It's time we make a decision. I want to know what the fuck soup from now on is. He's questioning the rationality. Why do we have soup of the day? Something like that. This is using the idiom in its canonical sense. There's no creativity connected to the use of the idiom. But there are 3 remaining jokes with idiosyncratic idiom semantics. It's like broken semantics of an idiom. It's different than employing an established literal sense of a word with de-idiomatization. This is breaking the meaning very idiosyncratically. So here we go. Mitch Hedberg, I used to be a hot tar roofer. Yeah, I remember that day. And we're shocked because he says day. So at the bottom, I have the meaning of used to, according to me, did something for an extended period in the past, but no longer do it regularly. And the red part is violated or ignored to make this joke. It's supposed to be an extended period. 1 day is not enough. Same with I used to do drugs. I still do, but I used to too. Almost the same kind of joke. In this case, the violation is about you have to no longer do it in order to say used to.
1 minute.
So thank you so much. All right. If at first you don't succeed, skydiving is not for you. Ignore idiosyncratically changes the semantics of the proverb. You're supposed to potentially be able to do it a second time. So conclusion, answering my question, how did these 2 comedians use idioms creatively? A, mostly via de-idiomatization. B, occasionally by questioning the applicability or rationality of the idiom. And C, occasionally by whimsically altering the semantics of the idiom. A and C were both used to achieve referential ambiguity. B and C were both used to subvert conventional wisdom. And a couple more questions answered. How did they use the idioms canonically? By questioning their applicability or rationality. And creatively, we saw through de-idiomatization or whimsically. What about the proportions? Well, of the 79 jokes, three of them had idioms used totally canonically. 76 were creatively, and 74 of those used some functional idiomatic creativity in the semantics. 2 of them used some formal creativity, but canonical semantics, and that is my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. You can write down my address and send me any questions you have, any comments you have. I'd be so happy. And I will stop sharing now and go to questions.
Perfect. You can put questions in the chat or use the raise hand feature on Zoom, which looks like Walker has done. So you go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. My goodness, she's invasive, that woman. Thank you for your presentation. I am curious as to tell me more about the choice of the comedians and their gender and their white guys.
Yes.
How did you work with that in your analysis of the data? How did you work with that?
Okay, so I was trying to be sensitive to issues of gender and race and things like that, and I actually viewed material from comedians of different genders, including some whose gender I couldn't even identify, which I thought was probably a good thing, and then different races, and I just didn't see the phenomenon of using idioms creatively to make humor. And I'm sure there was some of it. I saw a few, but I just didn't see it enough that I thought I would have to go through a whole hour comedic performance and get 3 examples versus I managed to get dozens of examples. So that's the only reason I went with these 2 comedians in the end, is just because I was starting with the linguistic phenomenon and I was focused on that. It doesn't mean that other comedians don't do it. I just didn't notice it when I did my kind of exploratory pass at the material. So I will probably go back and check and try to find a more diverse range of comedians and see how they use these things.
Thanks.
Thanks for your question.
There's a question from Amy in the chat.
Okay.
Carey, this was fun. It reminded me of the material of Emo Phillips and his use of paraprosdokian, which we all immediately recall is when the latter part of a sentence, phrase, larger discourse is surprising or unexpected in a way that causes the reader or listener to reframe or reinterpret the first part. Thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know about any. I can't even read the word paraprosdokian. It's my first time I've ever said that. I think my IQ just went up 7 points. I'm not really, I'm not really sure what it means, but basically that's exactly it. The latter part of the sentence or the joke, the punchline reveals something that causes us to reframe it. That's exactly what I saw with this data. So for sure, there's a connection that you made. I didn't understand.
Carey, if you're
Yes.
leaving here smarter than when you arrived, then my job is done. Also, it's used by Groucho Marx.
Oh,
My spirit animal, actually, Groucho Marx. But it's in his material too. So
great.
just sharing.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone, either in the...
I put this in the chat. So the idiomatization, it's almost impossible to pronounce. And usually the term is literalization. So if you look it up on Google Scholar, there's like hundreds of references, thousands, in fact, of references.
Okay,
so
thank you so much.
The accepted term, and in the process you'll find some references that you can probably quote.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
However, I have to say that that's not exactly what I found, because the comedians didn't always use a literal word meaning in order to make the humor. Sometimes they would use another not very literal, pretty abstract word meaning, but just an entrenched word meaning. We all know this word has these different meanings.
But I mean, in the case of idioms, you have the idiomatic meaning, which
Right.
is by definition different than the literal meaning.
For
So
sure.
the moment that it's not the idiomatic meaning, you've re-entered the literal meaning. Now, of course, you can play with it, and that I thought was the most interesting part, because of course, taking an idiom or a metaphor literally is the oldest strategy in the book. But what I thought was super interesting were those examples where they do something slightly different. Like, for example, they deny it creatively, like the if you don't succeed with the parachuting, try it, that's very funny because you really don't expect that.
Yeah.
So, but it's still within the domain of the literalization.
So even if they use a different word sense that's not literal at all.
Well, as long as it's not the idiom, it's the
Okay.
literal meaning.
Then I guess I don't like that term very much, but still it'll be useful when I go look for some more references. So thank you.
Looks like Leslie had a raised hand.
Yes. I wanted to say thanks for the presentation, because as a working comedian who writes jokes and not a linguist, the way that you said things like demetaphorize or whatever, the way you broke down the what Salvador is saying in literalization into smaller pieces makes your presentation to me very usable and valuable.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's fantastic. I hope I can see how it works on your performance someday.
Well, definitely it's going to help me just in my notebooks. It's like a how-to guide to be, and these two, just for people that are wondering, these are the main comedians that do that. That's the linchpin of their comedy. So of course you chose those two guys, and yeah, other comics scatter that stuff in, but these are the obvious choices, I think.
That's great. Thank you so much.
We have a few more minutes for any questions. If anyone has any more questions, either in the chat or using the raise hand feature on Zoom. Yeah, Anthony.
Yeah, hey Carey. So Mitch Hedberg's obviously deceased, so your sample's easy to look at because it's finite. What are you going to do when Stephen Wright passes away?
Oh, probably have a little funeral in my home, but I don't think that I got all of Stephen Wright's jokes. I was just happy to get enough that I could kind of compare
Right.
with Mitch Hedberg, and then in the end, there was no significant difference in the way they used idioms that I could see with that limited amount of data anyway. So, yeah, it would be nice to have everything, but I'll wait till he passes away to make that claim, I guess.
And so two quick things also. Do you mean that style of one-liners is considered old style? Are you having problems finding newer people, younger people to test what you're talking about? That'd be the first question. Then the second one is, I know you're working in Japan. Have you been looking at any Japanese comedians to seeing that as well, to find something that's not just English based, so to speak, to find a larger understanding? So that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, so okay, thanks. So as far as younger comedians, what's that guy's name? He just released a Netflix special, Anthony Jeselnik, I think. Yeah, I mean, very, very funny, but outrageous stuff. I didn't find any use of idioms to make humor at all. So maybe your kind of category or generalization is correct, that younger people just don't do it.
Same thing you can say with prop comics as well. I mean, like there's obviously there's style that works in the business as well, So
For sure, yeah. And as far as Japanese comedians, there is no stand-up comedy in Japan or Japanese. There are just different genres of comedy, and you don't have one person standing and telling jokes. You always have two people, almost always, or
Right.
more than two. So changes everything. And I haven't researched it yet. I should just say that. I haven't seen any idioms used creatively, but I haven't really done the hard work. So
Thank you so much for your talk and for your time. I see Joe has a hand raised, but in order to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to move on to the next presenter. Thank you so much, Carey, for your talk and your time.